Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad Sahab. You can begin when you're ready, sir.
So, okay, I was just wondering if the printout is it with the with the participants, or should I open
Uh,
my screen here?
no, if you can share your screen, that will be easier. Then you can open it up and
Okay.
share your screen.
Can you see the screen?
Um, Not yet.
Okay. Share screen. Says okay. No one sees your screen. Sharing the screen. Uh,
We can see it now.
you can see it now. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome, my dear viewers, to this session of our Islam Study Circle. Uh, I have been away for a couple of weeks because of some other commitments, and I'm now back. And I hope, inshallah, this will continue uninterrupted. Well, you never can say, but as far as I know, there should be no interruption now, inshallah. So we begin with our study circle, and as you would know, the first part of our study circle generally consists of some texts that we study, and these texts are not only from the Quran and Hadith, but they are also from the Bible. So we're going to study some texts from all these three sources, and then in the next session or the next segment of this session, inshallah, we'll discuss some misconceptions or some common misperceptions regarding Islam. Uh, the text of the Quran that I have chosen today for you is being displayed before you on the screen, and it is Surah Ahzab, the 33rd Surah, and verses 70 to 71. So let me read out the text and its translation, and then I'll just briefly explain some of the important points of this verse, of these verses. So it reads as Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida yuslih lakum أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Translation of these verses are: believers, fear God and speak the truth. As a result, He will set right for you the consequences of your deeds and forgive your sins. So this is something of a very common knowledge that one of the basic universal human values is truthfulness, to speak the truth, come what may, whatever is whatever are the circumstances, whatever we are facing, as far as our situation is concerned. In all circumstances, it is the truth that we must always adhere to. Not only speak the truth, but also continue to side with the people who speak the truth. And I often say that, as you would all know, we have this famous undertaking when we testify to in a courtroom. We often say, "I shall speak the truth and nothing but the truth." This is, in fact, said as an oath. So my contention has always been that it should not just be an oath in the courtroom. In fact, this should be a motto of our life. When I say I shall speak the truth and nothing but the truth, it should be something which I do so all the way, all through in my life, and nothing should stop me from saying the truth. And I would add, in fact, something to this as well, and that is that, as I've already pointed out, that not only should we speak the truth and nothing but the truth, but also we should support all people and side by all those people who speak the truth. And generally, this is the case that when we are faced in when we face such scenarios, often people who are speaking the truth in our society, they need our support, they need our backing, because at times the voice of truth is very low, and it needs to be increased. It needs to become audible. In fact, it should become a deafening din for the society. So a society in which the basic building block or the basic human value of truthfulness is upheld is something which you can clearly see is a society in which all other values would be upheld as well. And this particular Quranic verse, as you can see, this particular Quranic verse has a very, very strong message to give us. When it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida, you would know that this particular Quranic verse is also read whenever the nikah sermon is being recited by people. And one of the reasons is that the whole family structure and the family background or the institution of family heavily relies on this trait of truthfulness. So the verse says, "Amanat taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida." Believers speak the truth. Say what is the truth. And when at the time of the nikah sermon, these verses are recited, it means that if a family, if the institution of family is today being founded by the union of a man and a woman, then let it be founded on the firm value of truthfulness. Because if truthfulness is the building block, is the basic value to which the spouses look up, it will create an immense amount of trust. The biggest thing which can really cement a family, a spouse relationship, is the trust between the two spouses. And if the spouses know that they are going to speak the truth to each other, then you can well imagine how trust can really take place and how deeply it can be rooted in the family structure. And this, as I said, would be something of a very, very big advantage and a huge benefit for any family institution. And perhaps this is the reason why this particular verse is also recited at the time of our nikah sermon. And as you can see, the verse not only ends here, there's a second part, and it says, "Yuslih lakum a'malakum," that God will set right for you the consequences of your deeds, which means that speaking the truth at times is very, very costly. We all understand that when we speak the truth, at times things get out of hand. Instead of being acclaimed and applauded, we are condemned for speaking the truth. We are at times, we lose a lot of friends when we speak the truth. Similarly, we might also lose financially when we speak the truth. But the Almighty says, and I think it's a big, big consolation and a very big motivation for all those people who think that truthfulness at times makes that person suffer. The Almighty says, "Yuslih lakum a'malakum wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum." So there are two things that He says, that the consequences of your deeds will be set right. So even if you think that you're suffering at the moment and you're losing your relatives maybe or any other situation in which you might be going through a trauma, but ultimately the Almighty says, "Yuslih lakum a'malakum." He will set right the consequences of your deeds, which means that the reward that He'll give is immense. And in the next part, He actually explains this reward. The word that actually occur in the verse are, "Yaghfir lakum zunubakum." He will forgive your sins. Of course, these sins are the ones which are our minor sins, and in which we are making a lot of mistakes and errors. The Almighty says that these sins will be forgiven. And I think this is a huge consolation that if speaking the truth is something, even if we suffer it temporarily, the Almighty says ultimately it will augur good. Not only that, but the Almighty will also forgive our sins for speaking the truth. So you can well imagine, if the Almighty is going to forgive our sins for speaking the truth, how lucrative this deal is, how lucrative this whole issue is. And we must not shy away simply because we think that this might actually be a source of suffering or a temporary loss for us. And then these verses, as they end on a very, very important note, and it says, وَمَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا, which of course means that people who obey God and the Prophet, then this is great success. And although this translation you might not see being cited, and the verse finishes earlier on, the translation finishes earlier on, but the verse cited incomplete actually goes on to tell us that if we obey God and the Prophet, then this is indeed great success. If you want to define what great success is, then the verse says, مَن يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. So in short, I would just point out to a couple of things that we need to set right when we are talking about various things. So first, as you would know, that the most important thing here is that whenever we get together, one of the important uh, things that we discuss, or I would say commonly discuss, they are discussed amongst us very commonly. It can be termed as gossip, in which we are actually at times we're loosely talking about one another. We are making comments which are not at all truthful. They are based on hearsay, and we are also damaging the repute of a person who might not be present at the time that we are making this conversation. So the first thing that we need to be very careful of is that we must not speak of people in their absentia as far as possible. And if at all we have to speak about for them, then let this be words of praise and encouragement for people who are not present amongst us. Otherwise, this would not be a good thing. And and even speaking the truth regarding a person's evil habits is something which has been forbidden to us, and that is what we call backbiting. So backbiting is mentioning a person's evil habits or bad habits. Even if I mean you're not lying when you're speaking of his bad habits, but even that truthfulness behind a person's back is not at all warranted. Although we have to be truthful in normal circumstances, but this is a particular case in which backbiting has been disallowed to us because of the simple reason that the person that about whom we are talking of is not even present before us. He cannot defend himself, and hence we must not speak of him. So, a couple of things like making a promise, especially uh, at the time that we are making a promise where we know that we'll not be able to fulfill that promise. We should be very courageous and truthful in this regard, that instead of making a commitment, we should outrightly say that this is something beyond us. And then, of course, as I said, gossip and hearsay should be totally avoided. Exaggeration should be avoided. Understatement should be avoided. Plagiarism should be avoided. I would go as far as to say that even infringing this truthfulness, one of the very results of this infringement is polytheism. So the Almighty says that the biggest falsehood, the biggest lie of this universe that can be invented is polytheism, because you are imputing falsehood on God. You're imputing falsehood regarding something which God has given you no knowledge. So right from these small lies that we might actually say without any hindrance and without any check, it goes as far as this heinous sin of polytheism. So I would say that the most important thing here is that before going to bed each night, we must evaluate ourselves, in particular regarding how truthful we have been to our own selves, to the society that we live in, as well as to our own near ones. We must actually every day make a count of the understatements, the overstatements, the exaggerations, the lies, the white lies that we have been uttering in that day, during that day, and then make this firm commitment and resolve that we will, inshallah, not repeat this the next day and the next day and the next day. So the best thing to be a person of truth or a person who upholds truthfulness is continuous self-accountability. And the second important tip that I'd like to give here is that if we become seekers of the truth, speaking the truth will also become easy for us, because when we seek something, imperceptibly it becomes a part of our subconscious that we have to honor the truth, we have to find the truth, and this has this effect on us that we have to speak the truth as well. So these are a couple of things regarding truthfulness which I wanted to explain. And now let us move on to the next part of this segment, and this relates to the hadith that we're going to study today. And as you can see, that this hadith has been, I've given a title to this hadith, which is called Sympathy, and it has been taken from the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. Let me read out the text and then also the translation of this hadith before you. It says, النعمان بن بشير قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المسلمون كرجل واحد إن اشتكى عينه اشتكى كله وإن اشتكى رأسه اشتكى كله. So Numan ibn Bashir stated that God's messenger said, Muslims are like one body of a person. If the eye aches, the whole body aches, and if the head aches, the whole body aches. And you can well imagine the importance of this narrative regarding our social relationship and the social structure in which we are living. So it is said that Muslims are in fact a single body. They have this attachment to each other, which is natural. The Quran, at another place, has said that innamal mu'minuna ikhwa fa aslihu bayna akhawaykum, which means that Muslims are brothers to each other. They are as if they are one body, as if they think of each other in a manner that you think of a brother. And as the narrative very nicely explains, that if the eye aches, the whole body aches. Eye is a part of our body. Similarly, our head is a part of the body. So it is not just the eye which is aching. It's not just the head which is aching. It's the whole body which aches, which feels this ache. And the purpose of this metaphorical statement here in this narrative is that we should feel for others the way we feel for our own selves. So just as we would feel this pain, this headache in our whole body when the head aches, similarly, when we find someone in distress, wherever he would be, it's not just the question of a person living right close to us. Of course, people living close to us have more right on us. They should be given more importance. But we are people who must always open our eyes, look for people in distress, people who are suffering, people who are going through a trauma, and we should feel their pain as if it's our own pain. I think this is a very beautiful feeling. Of course, it's a feeling of pain, but the fact is, it becomes beautiful when you share the pain with others, when you share others' pains, and you think that you can do something for that person. So, as the narrative actually wants us, it's not just the feeling of pain, but the next step is that if we feel for someone, we should go out and help him or her as well. So, helping a person should come to us naturally. Sympathy, selflessness, compassion, kindness, consideration, these are all human values and human qualities that should exist naturally. And we should try our best that we should actually present ourselves as wonderful human beings, as human beings who have all these basic qualities, especially sympathy and concern for others. We should feel for others the way we should feel perhaps for our own selves, and more so maybe for our children, for our relatives, the way we feel for them, our neighbors, people who are in distress. We should have this feeling that we should do something about them. It's not always possible at times to do or help people, but then it's not always required that you go out all the way and find such people. It's that you can always find other people who can help them if you're hampered yourself. And I would also suggest that we must never underestimate the power of supplicating to the Almighty, the power of dua. We must always remember that when we pray to the Almighty for someone who is in distress, this must never be underestimated. Of course, our own action plan should be that we should take the first step in trying to sympathize with people and alleviating their sufferings. But at times, this is not always possible. So we should always try to bring others to attention that other people might help. A simple phone call, a WhatsApp message maybe, or as you can see, at times these means of communication have become so easy that a friend of ours, if he comes to know of another person's distress, then he or she is in much better position to actually help that person. And of course, a simple phone call on our part, or WhatsApp message from us, or an email from us could have done this whole thing. So let us not even shy away that if we are not able to do something ourselves, let us take it upon ourselves to bring it to the notice of our brethren, of our friends, of our relatives. Maybe they can do something in this regard. And finally, as I said, we must not underestimate the power of dua before the Almighty, because He hears and listens to all people, and we never know that our own prayer for a person who's suffering might work. But the bottom line is that we must become individuals who should stop merely thinking of our own selves. It's not just we or I or my or things that belong to me. No, we have to think of others as well. For only if we start thinking of others can we expect others to think of our own self. And only then can we become people who are closely knit with one another and who think with one another. And I could also suggest to you that at times this sympathetic feeling or this feeling of sympathy and empathy is toned down in our daily routines because of the machine-oriented life that we are leading. And one way to actually polish or become more sensitive in this trait of sympathy is we should go to places in where mankind and humankind is in a spot of bother. For example, hospitals, for example, orphanages, for example, slum areas where people and humanity are really in distress. So if something is missing in our daily routines, it is this, that at times people around us, real living people around us who are in distress, we fail to notice them because of our everyday surroundings. But if we open our eyes, and as I said, we are able to go to a hospital or to an orphanage or to such areas in which people are suffering, this feeling of sympathy is further escalated. It is stimulated, and hopefully, inshallah, it'll do something for us. It'll make us think of others as well. And now, my dear viewers, let me move on to the third part of this segment, and it actually relates to. Let me just. So it relates to forgiveness, and I've made this the title of the verses of the Bible, to be exact, the Gospel of Saint Luke, chapter 17, verses 3 to 6. And as you can see, I have titled it as forgiveness. And let me just read out these verses before you. So it says, "Give attention to yourselves. If your brother does wrong, say a sharp word to him. And if he has sorrow for his sin, let him have forgiveness. And if he does you wrong 7 times in a day, and 7 times comes to you and says, I have regret for what I have done, let him have forgiveness." And the 12 said to the Lord, the 12, of course, here refer to the 12 disciples of Jesus. And the Lord, of course, it refers to Jesus Christ. So he said that it says that make our faith greater. And the Lord said, if your faith was only as great as a grain of mustard seed, you might say to this tree, be rooted up and planted in the sea, and it would be done. So as you can see, the message of these verses, chapter 17 and verses 3 to 6 of the Gospel of St. Luke is very, very moving. And it tells us that if a person comes to you 7 times and asks for forgiveness, don't hesitate. Don't think that this is something of your own, something which has something of a bigger demand that you would think, because we are in our own selves, we also are able to make a lot of mistakes. We in fact make so many mistakes that we feel ashamed many a time of what we have done. So we must always think that if the other person has made a mistake and he has come to us and asked for our forgiveness, then let it be that we forgive him as much as we can. And although we have been allowed by religion to retaliate on equal terms, but as the Quran has said in a number of places, that if we forgive, forgo, and forget, this is a much better deal, and the Almighty will reward. So the Quran says, وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ, that a person shows forgiveness, shows steadfastness, and forgives. إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ, these are one of the great matters of resolve that a person can do. So I would say that this is a very important message of the Quran, that as far as we can, we should try to forgive other people. We should not score points against each other. Of course, there are situations in which forgiveness becomes very difficult for us, and it might even be counterproductive, because at times we want to teach a person a lesson or maybe correct that person, and for that we have to perhaps defer the forgiveness or even never give it if the nature of the mistake the other person made is such. But in many cases, this forgiveness is something of a very, very important thing, because interpersonal relations heavily rely on forgoing and forgetting. Because you see, as human beings, we make inadvertent mistakes. At times, we make advertent mistakes and realize that we have made a mistake, and therefore we expect that the other person to forgive us. But as important as the fact is that this forgiveness is really something which elevates us before the Almighty. It might reduce our stature in the other person's eyes, as we might feel, but it will elevate our stature before the Almighty. Especially things in which the other person has done an inadvertent wrong. This is something that we must not make a business to score points off, because things which get out of hand often emanate from very, very small blemishes. So it is best to forget and forgo and start afresh, because this will actually engender trust. It will build trust. It will build this confidence from the other person that when you are forgiving that person, of course, there'll be a time when you shall also need that forgiveness from some other person, and it will be reciprocated. And also, one of the important things here to realize is that at times we make mistakes, and at times we cross our limits. So the biggest thing in this situation is that if we are, in spite of all our efforts, not able to control ourselves, then let us be very, very acceptive of the truth, and that is that we must ask we must go and apologize to the person whom we have wronged, even if it just goes on and on for several times. And therefore, this is something which works both ways. We have to seek forgiveness from other people, and we have to grant forgiveness to other people as well. And forgiveness is something which is the trait of a very noble human being. And as I said, there could be exceptions, but by and large, if we have to live in a society in which we have to make people come close to us, and also, for the sake of God, make them close to us, so that we are able uh, to deliver the message of God to them, then the biggest thing that we can do for such people, one of the biggest things, would be to forgive their blemishes and faults, and always look at the positive points that they have, the good habits that they have, the positive habits that they have, highlight them, forgive their weak points. Of course, this does not mean that you ignore the weak points. No, we make a note of those weaknesses and try to correct them. But again, it has to be in a very forgiving manner, in a very compassionate way. So this brings us to the end of the first segment of our study circle today, and we will move on here to the next segment once you have any questions regarding the content that I've just discussed. And I'd like to request my participant that let us keep the questions of this segment, they must relate to the topics that we have discussed. If you have general questions, the time for that would be when we finish the next segment. Thank you.
I have a question from Rafia Khaja Saiba. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Talking what you said about backbiting, I'm very confused. Could you please explain to me the definition of ghibat? We've been told if we see something wrong being done or something wrong going on, we should try and stop it. If we can't stop it, then we should condemn it publicly. And if this is not possible, then we condemn it in our heart. Is this ghibat or backbiting? This has confused me regarding the topic of backbiting that you said today.
Okay, so you see, the issue of backbiting or ghibat is something which the Quran has actually discussed very explicitly in Surah Hujurat, and it says that we must not discuss the evil points or the bad habits of the people who are not before us in their absentia. So even if the person has bad habits, they must not be discussed in his absentia or her absentia, because he is not there to defend them. And it is not that you are talking about some bad habits which he or she does not have. No, he has those bad habits, or she might be having those bad habits, or she might be doing something wrong. But discussing the personality of a person in absentia in a manner that you meant to belittle him. So the complete definition of backbiting or ghibat is that when you discuss someone in absentia, and the purpose of that discussion or the implication or the results of that discussion is that you want to demean that person or belittle that person, then this is what is called ghibat. Otherwise, at times, of course, you have to discuss other people's traits. For example, when you're considering someone to be a prospective son-in-law or daughter-in-law for yourself, you have to discuss the good and bad points of people that you might be selecting for a official post in your office. So these are all things that in which you are making this discussion for a certain cause, for a certain purpose. So ghibat actually means that you're discussing that person's habits simply and solely for the purpose of belittling him, demeaning him, or making fun of him. Otherwise, other forms of talking in absentia for some purpose, as I said, two very common examples are that you at times need to discuss a person because you want to consider him for a certain purpose, like, for example, a job, or maybe choosing as him or her as a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law. So these don't come into backbiting. And this, yes.
And Dr. Shehzad, regarding what I just asked you, that sometimes you see something wrong being done
Right.
publicly and you want to stop it. And we've been told, try and stop it if you have the strength. And if you can't stop it, then condemn it publicly. And if this is not possible, then condemn it in your heart. So when you say ghibat,
So,
do you mean humiliating the person, belittling somebody publicly?
right.
What's the difference between the two things?
So see, there is a very, very big difference between the two things. When we are discussing a person in absentia, that is rebirth, of course. And the other thing, could you repeat the other part of your sentence?
If we see something going wrong and we are
Okay, so
talking
right, right.
amongst
So
ourselves,
you're
yeah.
actually referring to a hadith of the Prophet, which actually says, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi," which means that when you see something wrong around your surroundings or in your surrounding, that you should try to stop it from your hand. So that is entirely different thing. That means that you're actually confronting that person. That person is in front of you, and you're trying to actually either stopping that person, or you're trying to give an advice to that person that this is something that you're not doing wrong, or you're doing it condemning something in your heart. So these are things which are entirely different, in which that person with which you are being engaged is a person who is in front of you. And also, you're not discussing that in public. You're actually you have this thought in your mind that I should make a plan to circumvent that person, to stop that person. So when you are actually doing rebirth, you're not making this plan of correcting that person. The purpose here is to belittle that person, humiliate that person before some other people. So the narrative that you just cited relates to your own person, in which you make your own self accountable for certain things going on in the society. But in the case of rebirth, you are discussing some person before a group of other people. You are
Oh,
actually
you
pointing out his bad habits,
you're trying to humiliate or belittle him publicly.
belittle him in front of other people. So
Oh,
you see, in case of this particular hadith, this hadith relates to a corrective. It's like a corrective measure that you can take, or it advises us that evil should not exist in our surroundings, and as best as we can, we should try to stop it. But here, rebirth or backbiting is something. It's such a big social evil, unfortunately, that it goes on unchecked. And let me also point this out, that it not only goes unchecked, it also goes undetected. It has become such a norm. It has become such a norm. I mean, it's like being encircled with this ailment of rebirth or backbiting, that every single gathering that we sit, we are generally discussing a person in absentia who's not there and making fun of that person. So, as one of my very close friends once said, that if we stop backbiting and discussing people in absentia, perhaps we would have very little to discuss in our gatherings. And I think it could be very true as well. So this issue of backbiting is very, very important. And as I said, because it goes unchecked, it goes undetected, it is all the more reason that we make a note of this, that whenever we sit amongst our own selves, at least I shall not do that. At least I will not talk of other people. And slowly and surely try to set an example before other people, that we must not discuss other people in this manner. And I think if this awareness is created, it's a question of creating this awareness. We must try to create this awareness, and the best way to create this awareness is to teach this to our younger generation, because they learn from us. And the biggest lesson, or one of the big thing that we can teach them, is to refrain from this backbiting, because it's primarily a negative thing. It primarily smacks of arrogance. It makes you a haughty person. It makes you an arrogant person. It makes you feel superior to other people. It is outright injustice, because that person is no longer there. Imagine our own selves. If we were being discussed by other people in our absentia, none of us would feel good. So what we do not feel good for our own selves, let us not feel the same for others as well.
Dr. Shehzad, does this apply to politicians? Because we do discuss their traits, their bad habits, their corruption. Does this follow in the same way, or is this people we
I
are
think
going to vote for?
a very pertinent question that you have raised, and I agree with scholars who say that discussing people who have public offices and who hold public responsibilities, backbiting does not relate to them. Backbiting actually relates to your interpersonal relationships, people who you know, people who are around you. As far as people are concerned who have taken a public office, and they have to be criticized. But in this particular case, the important point of note is that our criticism must not be based on hearsay. Often we are criticizing our politicians or people who hold public office on the basis of scanty information, on the basis of hearsay, on the basis of false information. So on that particular scenario, the point of caution is that if we have to discuss people publicly, of course we are allowed, because that does not, in my humble opinion, fall under the ambit of backbiting. But the point of caution in that particular area is that it must be based on facts and figures, on verified facts. Otherwise, we might not be indulging in backbiting, but we might be indulging in hearsay and in gossip, which is also something of an evil that we must avoid.
The last thing, thank you so much. The last thing you talked about lying. What happens when you have defense lawyers whose job is to defend their client, even if it's a murder case and they know
Right.
that he has done it? How does this?
So I think that this also goes on unchecked, and in our society that people who are lawyers, they simply for want of money, to gain money, they will not see whether their client has done something morally right or morally wrong. Their purpose would be to win the case only and to prove the other person as wrong. So I think that this is a very huge moral responsibility. Lawyers must not do something which violates this morality. I mean, simply for the sake of earning money, if they have to prove their client to be on the right side, even though they know that he is the person who is a perpetrator, who is a criminal, this is a totally uncalled for and activity, and no lawyer should do that. Let me give you an example of the famous thinker and poet of the subcontinent, Allama Iqbal. It is known that he had kept a munshi, sort of an assistant, and that munshi was entrusted with the job of verifying if the client who has come to him for that case is a genuine person or not. He genuinely needs to be advocated. Only then he would accept a case. He would not accept every case, and perhaps that is the reason that his practice did not shine as much as many of the others. But he took it upon himself to fight only those cases which were genuine, which could be defended, in which the client that had approached him really was on the suffering side. I think we should learn from him, and all lawyers and all advocates must not take up cases in which their clients are at fault.
But Dr. Shehzad, all over the world, I'm in America, all over the world, defense lawyers' job is, whether it's litigation, whether it's a criminal case, their job is to try and get the best for their client and to defend him to the utmost.
I understand. Right. So that is a sad part, I would say, and because that defense is not based on truthfulness, how can we endorse it? If something is not based on the truth, if something is not based on facts, even if the whole world starts to do it, how can we endorse it? Our own conscience, where is that gone? How can our own conscience stand up to such things? So I think if our conscience is living, and also we have this concern for the truth, the fact that we are going to side for the truth and not side with those people who lie, this is what should egg us on. This is what should urge us on, and it's not for the cause of money or for some other stakes that we should fight a case. I know what you're referring to, that it goes on all over the world, and defense attorneys and defense lawyers they earn huge amounts simply to save the skin of their client. But as I said, every person must weigh that whatever he is doing or she is doing must not be unethical, must not be immoral, and must not be based on falsehood and lies. And if it is, well, he or she should make up his mind or her mind, because one day he or she has to meet the Almighty and justify what he or she has been doing in this world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Before we move on to next segment, With your permission, can I add something to the backbiting subject?
Right, of course.
Um, Dr. Saab, it's my observation that in our societies and cultures, a lot of times backbiting has no ill intention behind them. Uh, as you know, the standardized typical definition implies that you have you know intention of belittling someone. I have seen that you know in households when parents are engaged in it and children see it, they get a behavior imprinting. It becomes a thing of habit as opposed
Hmm.
to actual intention and malice. Um,
Hmm.
and it continues from generations to generations to generations.
Hmm.
It's a habitual thing versus planning to character assassinate someone or something like that. I just wanted to add that. I mean, being mindful about what we impart to our children as a habit, which is
Right.
so dangerous and so bad.
Very dangerous, and I think you rightly pointed this out. And because at times it goes undetected, and children simply see what their parents are doing, they copy them. So therefore, the question of right and wrong does not even arise in their minds. And I know that there are times in which you discuss other people in absentia, when the purpose is not to belittle them or to humiliate them, but you're just discussing the other person. Well, there is a very thin line here as well. You can see that even when you're discussing a person and the purpose is not to belittle that person, then there has to be some objective. Some. It's not should not be a case of venting out your frustration regarding that person. At times, that too happens. So the proper way I would suggest, which the Almighty has suggested, is that if you've been hurt by someone, you see, at times this happens that when you're hurt by someone, you share your hurt regarding that person, maybe with your own friend or your own brother. So the conduct which the Almighty has said is that innama ashku basti wa huzni ilallah, while referring to to one of the examples set by the Prophet Jacob, father of Joseph. He said that I'll present my petition and my sorrows to the Almighty. So this is often the case that when you get hurt, you discuss other person's hurt with another person. And although it not be a classical case of backbiting, it cannot be, because here you don't intend to belittle that person. You're just trying to vent out your frustration. But you see, as I said, there is a thin line when you start venting out your frustration or your hurt with, regarding the other person before some of your own friends. Uh, it's very difficult for yourself to contain, and more often than not, what you do is that you actually supply a piece of information to one of your friends who might not be having the other part of the story regarding the person who actually hurt you. And this indirectly would actually besmear the character of the person. And you, in your own self, might be venting out your frustration. But at the same time, this could be a case in which you're actually transmitting information in which you have been wrongly hurt, and therefore you're submitting or passing on some wrong information to another person who, as a result, at times starts to form an opinion about the person you're discussing. So these are certain other areas as well, and we must take into account. And as I said, this Quranic examples set by one of the premier prophets of God, that if you are hurt by a person, if you're really very disappointed and frustrated at the attitude of a person, then instead of discussing that hurt with someone else, it's best to discuss that hurt with the Almighty and submit your petition before the Almighty and ask for solace and comfort from the Almighty. Because if you vent out your frustration, as I said, it might have some other repercussions. But if you vent out your frustration before the Almighty, I think it'll be in case of spiritual enhancement. It will spiritually elevate you because you're discussing that hurt with no one except God, and you can expect that God, inshallah, is going to cement and strengthen you inside out.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. We can move on to our next segment. Rafia Saiba just had a question, but if it's okay with her, we can take it at the end. Thank you.
So the misconceptions I had today to discuss, I am going to just choose, in fact, from what one of our questioners, Mr. Afia, had raised earlier on, because what she has just said is also a very big misconception if we take that hadith out of context. So I'm going to discuss that hadith in a very short way in the remaining time that we have, and then you can ask questions if you want. This famous hadith, which is often used by people to disrupt, for example, music ceremonies or areas or gatherings in which you think uh, something is being done which is against the directives of the Almighty, is this particular hadith that we've just referred to often is invoked. And the narrative actually says, "Man ra'a minkum falyughayyirhu biyadihi," that if you see something wrong, you can stop it from your hand. And if illam yastate biyadihi, if you bilisanihi, if you are not able to do it from your hand, then do it from your tongue. And if even if that is not possible, then you can do it. You can condemn that act in your heart, and then a narrative says that this is the lowest level of faith. Now, often this narrative is misconstrued and misplaced and misunderstood, and people think that whenever they see something going on wrong in the society or around them, in particular, youngsters who think that there's something which is going on very wrongly in our own society, maybe next door, maybe people in the very next house that we're living in, our neighbors, they're indulging in something which we would not condone at all in the light of Islam. They would go and disrupt that. For example, if there's a drinking session going on there, or there's a dance party there, or anything which people think that they're doing wrongly as far as the Quran or Islam is concerned, they think that it is this narrative which tells them that if they can do so, they must do so. The highest level of faith is that they should do and go and stop that gathering from taking place. Now, a couple of things here need to be explained. First of all, it needs to be understood that this narrative talks of your own circle of authority. When it says that you stop evil from your hand, first of all, evil is something which has to be defined. And evil here actually refers to everything which is immoral, which is munkar in the word of the Quran. And the second thing is that it has to be in the circle of your authority. For example, as a father, you can do it in the family that you're living in. As a teacher, you can do it in the classroom, perhaps. But you're not responsible for something which is going on in the society vis-a-vis this particular narrative, that you go and stop it with your hands. This actually relates to your circle of authority, and a very similar narrative, which has been discussed elsewhere, is actually clarifies this misconception, and that is kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ul an ra'iyatihi, that each of you is accountable for the each of you is like a shepherd, and just as the shepherd is accountable for the herd that he has kept, similarly you are accountable for your own herd. And this clearly tells us that our own herd, this example tells us, is the one that is under our control. It's not that we go right, left, and center outside of society to various other houses, or maybe in other areas, and start stopping people by our hand and then say that this is the highest level of faith, because the hadith tells us that if we do stop something from our hand, then this is what is required. And the lowest level would be that we do nothing and just condemn it. No, first of all, it needs to be understood that here the most important thing is that the circle of authority is being discussed. And again, fa'illam yastate, which means you don't have the strength, does not here refer to the strength of faith actually. It refers to the strength of circle of your authority. It says that even if you're in your own circle of authority, you're not able to do something, then this is of a lesser category of faith. So how can this be a bad thing or a sin if you're outside your circle of authority? So if you have a weak faith always refers to something that you can do in your own control. So I would say that we can all go on and explain this narrative further on, but the bottom line is that this narrative primarily relates to your own circle of authority, and stopping evil by our hands forcibly is something that we can only do in our circle of authority, and we just cannot move out of our house and go to some other place and start doing this. This will cause disruption and vandalism, which is absolutely not called for. On a larger scale, we can pin this example that for a ruler, for a government, for example, their sphere of authority is the whole state. For them, it is essential that they curb evil in their circle of authority, which is the whole state, if they find it forcibly. So if there's something evil going on in the society, it is the responsibility of the state to curb that. It's not our responsibility. Our responsibility, of course, lies in the fact that we should try and discuss and advise and educate people regarding it, but we cannot go and barge into other people's privacy and say that since you're doing something wrong in our opinion, so therefore I'm going to stop you forcibly. This is an absolutely misinterpretation of this narrative. And I will end here this segment as well because we have little time left for questions. And it's now time that you can actually present your questions regarding this misconception or maybe any other question that you have.
Thank you. We'll take the first question from Rafia Saiba. I'm sorry I couldn't take it earlier.
Dr. Shehzad, if a person is born a Hindu, Buddhist, non-Muslim, and never gets a chance to gain knowledge of Islam till he dies, how will he be judged on Qiyamah Day?
So your question is that if a person is such that he has not received the message of Islam, maybe, and how will he be judged on the day of judgment? Well, Islam is something which has some conciseness and which has some comprehensive nature. In its concise nature, religion is based on your own cognizance of the Almighty and the fact that you're going to be held accountable one day. So the fact that we are going to be accountable for the good deeds or the bad deeds that we do, and we have a creator to whom we are responsible, so that will become the basis of our accountability in the hereafter. The Almighty will not ask us whether the message of Muhammad or other prophets have reached us or not. In that case, we will be held accountable for the facts that are found in our own nature and in our own instinct. And two of these prominent, or I would say, facts which are found ingrained in human nature is the cognizance and existence of a God, and second, that you will be held accountable one day before Him for the good and bad deeds that you do. So my simple answer to you would be in this case that if a person has not access to the message of religion or religion has not reached him, Islam has not reached him, then he shall be held accountable on the basis of his human nature and the fact that the Almighty or the conception of the Almighty exists in human nature. He'll be held accountable for that, and also for the good and bad deeds of which his or her own conscience was the best judge. He shall be judged, or she shall be judged upon regarding those deeds.
Rafia Saiba, does that complete your question? Any other questions? We still have about 7 minutes remaining. So we have no more questions, so I think we can.
So we can call it off. So okay, thank you. Then inshallah we'll meet next week, same day and same time.
Assalamu alaikum.
Khuda Hafiz.